We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Kristi Robinson. She is the VP of Talent and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at BARC. Kristi, thanks so much for being here. If you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kristi Robinson. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am currently the VP of Talent at BARC and also am responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I started with BARC in May of 2021. So I'm happy to be celebrating my 6-month anniversary coming up. And it's been an excellent ride so far. Thinking back to my childhood, what did I want to be when I grow up? It really connects very closely to BARC because I wanted to be a veterinarian. And that was always my goal. And then as I got a little bit older and learned a little bit more about what they did, I shifted my focus to wanting to be an attorney and spent some time learning about that space. And I said, you know what, I like that HR piece a bit more. And so I've been working in the space of human resources since I graduated from college. So that's been my area of focus. And within HR, I've done quite a few things, but always somewhere in the HR realm.
Very cool. I mean, we talked about how BARC has a really great company culture. It's really unique. And I want to kind of ask your definition of, company culture and how do you quantitatively or qualitatively measure, the success of the workplace?
Yeah, we're in a unique situation at BARC because from the start of the company, when our founders got together, the thought was let's hire people who love dogs and can connect to our mission of making dogs happy. So you can't be working for an organization where your company mission is to make dogs happy. And our employee value proposition is be the person your dog thinks you are. So that speaks just almost automatically to the type of culture that we have. It's a place where, we believe in having fun. We believe in being innovative, but we've hired smart people that like to solve big problems and they care about dogs and our other customers, which are our dogs, humans. Culture for us is really about living into our mission. It's really about making sure we're treating each other with respect. It's really about following basic leadership principles and leading by example, and making sure that it's inclusive and inviting to all. What's great about our company is if you go to our careers page, we say things like, we're looking for quirky people. We're looking for people who are different. The weirder, the better here at BARC. So that really speaks. I mean, we're pretty vocal out there about who we are and that we want to be able to look around and see people who not only maybe look different and not necessarily with race or ethnicity, but just look different, but think different as well. So that's really been a big part of who we are.
Absolutely. I think that's a great employer value proposition as well. Be the person you think or your dog thinks that you are. And as you continue to grow and scale, I would love to know from your perspective, what are the ways, BARC is being really intentional about scaling the culture of the organization as you continue to add more team members and expand?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that we just touched on at a recent all hands. And it was really me talking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a whole and thinking about what's the strategy and how does that play into BARC and how does DEI connect to be the person your dog thinks you are? How does our talent team's mission from a recruiting perspective connect to that? And a big part of what we talked about was at BARC, it's not that we're trying to solve a really big problem related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about remembering how all of these great employees got here and why they joined the company. Because when you ask our employees about our culture, many of our employees say, I'm here because of the culture. Whether or not they personally have a dog, a lot of our employees will very openly admit they love dogs. So there's such a connection to that mission that sometimes what happens with companies when they're scaling is that they hire rapidly and they're not doing that pulse check when they're bringing talent in the door to make sure that people are connecting to the mission. So we've just been having some good conversations, really focused on accountability. And part of being accountable is not just for the recruiting team to do that pulse check, but for all of us to want that as an employee base, to make sure that we are continuing to remember how we got here. We went public in June, the types of people that got us where we are, the types of people we enjoy working with, the environment, the space that's been created at Bark as well, the physical space, the mental space that we've created, that we want to continue to bring in that type of talent and not get too big to where we forget that. So we always have to be pulse checking to make sure that the talent that we're bringing in the door still aligns with the Bark mission.
Absolutely. It sounds like there is a really good foundation of a shared vision and passion for the mission of the company, which really cultivates a healthy company culture, one where people want to help each other out and really raise their hand to get involved. And another piece of that as well, in terms of talent, but also current employees, is cultivating that kind of culture of feedback. And I wanted to ask you how you see employee feedback management as an important tool for a culture of listening, and how you see that manifesting at Bark as a whole on a company level.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just said is actually why I personally joined Bark, is that connection to the mission and also being a Bark customer. Another thing that I found to be really interesting has been our feedback method. We actually complete a monthly employee opinion survey here.
Mhm.
So we're getting feedback from our employees. Just first of all, just do an open door policy that anyone can get feedback at any time, but there's still this channel that individuals can, pretty much submit feedback at any given time. It is anonymous feedback. They can put it in a specific category or bucket. Their manager can be notified, or a third party can be notified as well. So for instance, if there's a concern with diversity, equity, and inclusion, then I would be notified to be able to jump in and help and make sure that I'm listening and understanding that employee's concern or feedback, or celebrating positive feedback as well, because that venue does give you that opportunity to celebrate. So we're getting it pretty frequently at Bark. It's a very open door policy. I think that again helps shape who we are, and it's helped people feel safe. It's about safety and feeling supported. And it also still keeps with that piece of being inclusive. It's very
Absolutely.
transparent.
I think that's really important, that safety that you mentioned. And it's not only positive, negative feedback, it's constructive feedback, it's across the board. And feeling like you can give that to the company or leadership is important on an ongoing basis. Can you share an example where, Bark pivoted or made a change because of employee feedback? It could be a process, strategy, initiative, really anything.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really impressed me when I joined Bark is I met with the leader of our accessibility ERG, and she shared some information that she had done, her own research on, how Bark could better support that particular community, and also some things that other companies were doing. And I love to see like her enthusiasm and passion towards this space. And also it kind of caused us to do a bit of a gut check on, oh, there are some things, many low-hanging fruit that we can really tackle and make sure that we're supporting this particular community. It's not that there were a handful of complaints or that anyone was being vocal about it. It was just a thoughtful way of communicating with me as a new leader at the company to say, you're brand new. I just wanted to let you know I've made some observations, would love to share them with you, do with it as you may. And from there, we really took a look at that info and really took a look wholeheartedly at our physical environment and also things that you can't see. And we partnered with an organization called Inclusively. which I'm a massive fan of. And through inclusively, they ask you to complete an assessment in order to even partner with them, to say, here's what you provide at your company, here's what you're committed to doing, here's what you need to do. Really, really thorough organization. And that really furthered our commitment into this space as well in order to support this community. And inclusively doesn't just focus on individuals with disabilities, focuses also on individuals that prioritize mental health as a part of their life as well. So that partnership in itself has just been so valuable to us. We've had them in to do a video training with our HR team and our recruiting team for an hour and a half. And we did invite the ERG leaders of both the accessibility ERG and our mental health ERG as well. So that's an example of just listening. And, someone who just said, here's some information that I have. I just wanted to share it. And it caused us to really open our eyes and think, let's make sure that as we communicate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we're thinking very broadly in every single community and space, and not just kind of focusing on the kind of standard things that a lot of companies focus on, and really making sure mental health and accessibility are at the forefront as well.
Absolutely. That sounds like a really thoughtful approach, really effective communication. And it sounds like working with a subject matter expert, an organization whose body of work that is also really important as well. Partnerships, strong believer in that too. And I want to get specifically into BARC's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, because when we connected, I was really impressed by really the four specific pillars that you're focusing on, and wanted to know if you can walk us through an example of each of how you're executing it, starting with the continuous learning piece. I believe we talked about educational tracks and opportunities for the team.
Yeah, the approach to developing the strategy has been great because it kind of first starts with meeting with your CEO and making sure that you're aligned, and understanding your CEO's vision and thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how the company sits in that space and is the company supportive in that space. So, after having that conversation and conversations with our founders and other members of leadership, our employee base, our ERGs, it's kind of easy to think about, for now, we're going to focus on four things in order to really support our employees. And the first was continuous learning. And it was important to utilize a term that wasn't training or even just like education. It was really about coming off of the tough year that we all had in 2020. No matter who you are, what your background is, you learned something. And so it was really important to think about the fact that we all are always learning how to speak to each other, how to support each other, how to live in these spaces. So we should never stop learning. It's always going to be a continuous journey. So we thought through what our company was currently doing and what some of the other companies that we've all come from used to do. And a lot of that in the space of DEI is like, there's an annual required harassment training, or an annual required discrimination training. And we really wanted to be thoughtful about having some learning courses that touch on a few different things. So we have a great learning and development leader here, who has been partnering with me. And we thought through, why not take a look at the communities that are represented at BARC and see if there are different courses, seminars, areas of focus that we can focus on to help support and make sure people are educated about those communities. So a great example is like inclusively, which I won't hit on too much, but we have some accessibility training that we're rolling out for both employees and managers. The important thing is when you're developing a learning track, it's thinking about what all employees need versus some things managers need a bit more in order to learn how to support their employees. So not just through inclusively, but we have another course through EverFi as well. We thought about some gender-based learning tracks, some race and ethnicity learning tracks, mental health. So we really are trying to touch on every piece and part of the diversity spectrum in order to make sure that we're constantly educating and being thoughtful about when we're rolling these trainings out. So you never want to like have learning fatigue. So it's really putting a plan together that's multi-year, that focuses on the fact that we're not just going to do kind of a talk here and there at an all hands and say, yep, we believe in diversity, but we're really going to show and prove by making sure that we're providing the education for our employees and our leaders.
Absolutely. I think that intentional language that you're using as well in terms of continuously learning, always being, not a check the box solution, just having that growth mindset is important. Everybody's at a different part of their kind of equity journey, and some folks really want to raise their hand to be employee resource group leaders. You've touched on this a little bit at BARC in terms of the employee resource groups, the council that's available as well to participate in too. And I know that's another pillar of the strategy. Can you walk us through what additional support for ERGs the council looks like as well?
Yeah, so the company's formed a diversity and inclusion group, which is also known as a council, full of senior leaders that was really put in place to handle any escalations that would come up, monitor social justice activity, making sure that the executive team knew how to support employees through any of those incidents, and also just be a sounding board for the ERGs and their leaders with any escalations, questions, concerns that they have, and just provide support. So that's been great. That's a group of leaders that meet on a monthly basis to handle those types of things. And then the ERGs, we have 7. And the reason why ERGs and our diversity inclusion group are a part of our 4-point strategy is because we knew that they needed a bit more focus and more support, because this company has such an organic way of working and like people supporting one another, that the employees really did create these ERGs by themselves, super employee led, super voluntary, without a ton of visibility from the senior team. It wasn't that the senior team wasn't supportive, it was just kind of like these things just kind of happen with the employee base. And in a lot of companies, ERGs and different groups like that start with someone in leadership saying, I think we should do this. I saw other companies do it, or the last company I came from did it. So it's kind of polar opposite at BARC. So the ERG leaders met with me pretty early on and really talked about, we like what we're doing, not sure if everyone knows what we're doing. Everyone, even the employees, not just the leaders, like, can you help making sure we're getting like support and that we're not kind of doing all these things by ourselves and no one knows about it. So we did a few things. Added a coordinator to help our ERG leaders coordinate a lot of their events and activities and be a kind of a third party for ideas as well. We've added a role called ERG liaison. I actually got 2 volunteers that stepped up to be liaisons. They're actually a part of our diversity and inclusion group, that board. So it's great because they actually are the folks that would come to a board meeting and say, here's how the ERGs are doing, here's what they need, here's what's going well, etc. So that's great. And those 2 leaders have divided the ERGs in half. So they're getting tons of attention and support there. We also have added exec sponsors, which I think is fairly common with ERGs, but wasn't something that we had in place. So we do have an executive sponsor at the VP plus level for all 7 ERGs as well. And then through our workplace experience team, we'd already had someone who was kind of helping the ERGs with more event coordination and budgeting. And we just kind of made all that very official. So they have multiple layers of support, including being able to come to me at any time from an open door perspective. And the ERG leaders also said, hey, I'd like to be a bit more involved with understanding what our diversity inclusion board does. So we are now having them attend quarterly so that they can directly speak to the diversity and inclusion board themselves and share what's going on. So those are just some of the things that we thought through just as a part of that focus area, is providing that structure and support and the leadership piece, the connection to the executive team. They heightened their mission statements. Some groups had them, some groups didn't. So now we have like consistent mission statements for each ERG as well. And they also created something really cool that's coming soon on our bark.co website, which is they each have a logo that our creative team partnered with them to create that represents what their ERG stands for. So some really cool stuff going on.
Yeah, it sounds like you said, the phrase multi-level support and so many layers within the organization to focus on that visibility. And as a former employee resource group leader, I definitely appreciate hearing all of the kind of wonderful things you're doing to support the work that they're doing and their growth. I know we touched on this a little bit in terms of intentionally scaling the company culture at Bark, but the third pillar is around recruitment. So goals for interviewing candidates, and can you walk us through, what that looks like in practice as well as it relates to your strategy?
Yeah, what's great about the situation with the recruiting organizations, everything's fairly new. So part of my job as well is actually leading recruiting for Bark. So I'm in this great dual role where you get to lead diversity, equity, inclusion, and the recruiting organization. The cool thing is that the team is very focused on diversity already. So what we really have been focused on as a part of the 4-point strategy is putting pen to paper and developing a diversity sourcing strategy that's extremely targeted based off of data. So a cool thing that diversity and inclusion board or group did was they asked for data to be published on our intranet internally that has broken down by race, ethnicity, gender, age. We recently have added disability, veteran status. So all of that's public for all employees to go see at any given time. So what's cool about it is broken down by level, by department, by location, et cetera. So we have the data as a recruiting organization, which a lot of recruiting orgs complain about. Say, I don't have enough data. We don't know where we should be even looking for people. And a lot of recruiting orgs do that stuff manually. We have the data that tells us that in a specific business function, there's an opportunity area to bring in more underrepresented minorities or to bring in more women. We can break it down to say, at the entry level non-exempt, we need to do XYZ. At the executive level, we need to increase representation in XYZ space. Again, we're even looking at age to say, oh, we may need to diversify kind of the mix of age as well. So we have the data. And so it's now on us, can't complain and can't make excuses to say for marketing, we know that we should be looking for X. So let's create a complete strategy that's focused on bringing X into the table. We're always going to bring in the most qualified candidate. And we're not ever just going to bring X in, but to think about partnerships, sources, and ways of finding talent in spaces where representation is lacking.
Yeah, I think that data piece is really important, and that relates to the fourth pillar in terms of accountability. When we're talking about continuous learning, additional support for employee resource groups, recruitment, these are all great activities, and accountability is a really important one to tie it all together, especially for C-level executives and decision makers, people managers. Can you tell us a little bit about that fourth really important pillar?
Yeah, we went back and forth at Bark, and I, you could talk to me a year from now and we may have a different perspective, but that focus area has been a bit more forthright in just saying we want to lean into the culture that currently exists and make sure we remember who we are. And a lot of that is not saying we want to have X percentage of our employee base be XYZ. We want to have X number of people go through the interview process, da, 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 da. We've done a couple of things with the recruiting team and the senior leadership team to say, for Director Plus, we want to make sure that we have diverse representation as we're bringing candidates through those processes, because that is an area of opportunity for us to continue to expand underrepresented minorities. Other than that, we talked a lot about ensuring that our CEO is living into the words of accountability. And a lot of that is messages coming from the CEO's office about things that matter to our employees. And those have to be authentic messages. So luckily, I happen to have a CEO that's very authentic and wants to communicate. Actually, just yesterday on our all hands, very openly said, I want to just celebrate the work that our Latinx ERG did during Hispanic Heritage Month last month, the work that our accessibility and mental health ERGs are doing right now during National Disability Awareness Month. Just making sure that people know that as a company, these things are important, not just to our employees, but to our CEO as well, and to us as a whole. And doing things like, making sure our employee base understands messaging that he sent out on the anniversary of George Floyd's passing. So very sincere, authentic messages of support, and making sure that all communities are hearing those messages of support regularly. In addition to that, our CEO has asked our leadership team to be a bit more present in supporting our employee resource groups. So we've asked to have at least 2 leaders attend each ERG event and ERG meeting. We'd like to see that representation in order to really support our ERGs and what they're doing, what they're spending their time doing for free as volunteers. So that message was heard loud and clear. And a lot of people, honestly, they just needed like a nudge and a reminder.
For sure.
So we've been doing a lot of things like that, of saying it's coming from the top. So it's a challenge at some companies, because you're going to maybe not have a CEO that's as kind of tuned in and dialed in as this one I'm describing. But if you can get that support from a senior leader and or the senior leadership team, it goes a mile. It makes your employees feel good. Like, wow, we're acknowledged. It was great looking at the chat during the all hands when our CEO started talking about these 3 ERGs, and seeing the chat of everyone giving them shout outs and saying, this is great. It's authentic, it's sincere. And lastly, we've asked all employees to be a part of the accountability focus. And again, making sure we're treating each other with dignity and respect. We're living into our values. We're, again, remembering how we got here, and remember who you want sitting next to you every day, who you enjoy working with, and that you enjoy having differing opinions, differing thoughts, and people who just may not be just like you. So we're talking a lot to the employees, just very openly, about culture, inclusivity, and that we're all accountable in this space.
Absolutely. We're all accountable. It's all on us to really show up for one another, and that authentic, that genuine point. People can tell when you are being authentic and when you're not being authentic, and especially from the CEO, having that support is really important. I know I asked a lot around, the diversity, equity, inclusion strategy at BARC and company culture. For folks who are listening to this episode and they're like, wow, I would love to be in Kristi's role, that dual function of talent and diversity, equity, inclusion. I know you mentioned you have a ton of HR experience, but what, in your opinion, is really needed for someone who aspires to be in a role like yours to be successful?
Yeah, on the diversity side, it's definitely someone who has a lot of patience, understanding, have to be a communicator, and a listener. So a big percentage of my job on the DEI side is listening. And, that takes a lot of control. It also takes a lot of empathy. And there's a lot of strength that you need as well as an individual, because some of the things that you're hearing are not the best things that you've ever heard. So there's a lot of labor that goes into some of the conversations. So you have to be strong enough to be there, be supportive, not reactive, and really process the information that people are sharing with you, and making sure that you're always thinking about what's best for the employee and their safety. And a lot of times their safety means you can't go run to your chief people officer and say, this is what this person just said to me. You have to really be thoughtful about how to support your employees and protect their privacy. And on the recruiting side, there's a lot of those same characteristics, not as much, but it's an energy that I then have to kind of switch from DEI to recruiting, of, making sure that we're bringing in the best and brightest talent that is diverse. We're doing it in a timely manner. We're doing it in a thoughtful way. We're partnering with our hiring managers. We're providing a great candidate experience. So there's not a ton of people out there that are doing the two roles like I'm doing. But if one is interested in recruiting, I would say there's a lot of energy surrounding that space. I love the recruiting side and I love the diversity side. There's a duality to it though, where I have to kind of switch on and off, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. That active listening piece, empathy, is really important. And again, being really thoughtful and intentional. I bet there's never a day that goes by that's, you're bored, I should say.
No boredom here.
Lots going on. Kristi, is there anything that I either didn't ask that you want to share with our audience who's listening, or maybe a key takeaway you want to underscore, bold, italicize?
This has been a pleasure. I would just say that if you're new in a diversity, equity, and inclusion role, first things first, meet with the senior leader, the most senior leader in your company that has the availability to meet with you, and make sure that there's some alignment in the way that you view the company seeing diversity versus what the company's publicizing versus how the employees feel about it versus reality. So make sure that you're having just an open and honest conversation, because the first time you get in front of that employee base, it's just so important to have your information straight, making sure that your information reflects how the employees truly feel, and making sure that you're super authentic. It'll help you tremendously.
I think that is a great call to action to end on. Thank you so much, Kristi, for taking the time in your busy schedule to be on the show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed on a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.